Hello, my dear souls, and welcome to Healing with Jude podcast, a healing space where we share with you tools and inspiration to make your life more mindful and still. And today is a really special episode for two reasons. The first one is that the recording of the podcast will be also on YouTube, on my new YouTube channel, Healing with Jude. And the second one is because I do have here in front of me, on the other side of the world, an incredible human being, so inspiring. She works as a creative wellness coach. She does many things. And she is also my friend. And I want to introduce to all of you Leela Davis. Hello, Leela. How are you?
Hi. Good morning, good night, everybody. You're in night right now. What
Yeah,
time
it's
is it
basically
there?
an evening. Yeah,
Okay,
it's
okay. So
evening.
I'm
Yeah.
waking up. We're always on these like different wavelengths here. Well, we're always really on the same wavelength, no matter what time or where part of the word. But yes, I'm a creative wellness coach, and you may be wondering what the heck is that? Well,
Yeah.
it's a hybrid. It's a hybrid of that I created. Initially, I completed my health coach studies, and when I was excuse me, when I was trying to figure out my brand, I'm like, well, it's based on my own self healing journey, which is basically stabilizing my bipolar disorder,
Yeah.
um, which pretty much took over my life. And but when I successfully stabilized, I'm like, oh, I want to share my gifts, share my knowledge, share my experience, all of that good stuff. And a lot of what happened that helped me, besides the usual subject or suspects of yoga, meditation, um, pranayama, you know, mindfulness meditation, so on and so forth. We all know all know that.
Yeah.
Um, is that I used creativity, creative expression, not so much as a performative type, but more really seriously to make my life better.
Yeah.
So then I was like, well, creativity's in there, and I also used astrology and I Ching.
Yeah.
Um, I'm also a certified astrologer, um, so I was like, how do I put it all together? And that was actually one of the kind of our first discussions when we were
Yeah.
like started coaching together. It's like, well,
Yeah.
what do I call myself? I'm not exactly a health coach because there's so much more that I'm bringing into the picture and that I have to share with people.
Yeah. Because yes, that's true. Like we probably changed 3 or 4 times. How would you be called? And then in the
Exactly.
end, it came out creative wellness coach. I was like, yes, that's it. That's it. This is you. This is you.
So,
So
but yeah, I'll always be having to explain like what exactly that is until there's a bunch of other people out there. There's probably people out there that are already calling
oh yeah.
themselves that. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
it
yeah.
usually works out that way. So
Yeah.
I don't want to assume that I'm like the pioneer.
Why not?
I don't know.
So Lila, I wanted to start and I would definitely connect with what you talk because I think that when you said the bipolar, it took great parts of your life
Yeah.
and mostly started from your childhood, even if you didn't know what it was and what you came from or anything like this. Can you just share your story of your childhood?
Yeah, let's see. That's always fun, right?
Yeah.
Well, one thing one thing that creativity helped me was to recraft my narrative. So, typically when we're telling about our childhood stories, especially when it's related to a diagnosis,
Yeah.
there's this sense of like, oh, my life was so horrible, woe is me, you're the victim. And then, and you're the victim of the diagnosis. So that's not at all, what I want to present here. Yes, my childhood was challenging. Um, there's a lot of good things about it. Um,
Yeah.
Basically, I grew up in a single parent home, and my mother, although like she took care, she made sure that I had clothes and shelter and so forth, but she herself was working with the stresses of being a single mom, and she was very ambitious, and so we moved around a lot. But in retrospect, I you know trying to figure myself out,
Yeah.
um, looked into Asperger's, and was thinking, this, some of the things made sense, but not entirely. And then I was like, oh, wait a minute. It looks like my stepfather, like my uncle, really, and my mom. It all ran into the family. So there's this sort of like this emotional kind of an emotional challenge, them dealing with
Yeah.
me and me dealing with them. You know, I knew they loved me, but they weren't like emotionally expressive, and sometimes they didn't pick up on cues as to like what was the best thing to do for raising a child.
Yeah.
So my mom just like treated me like a little adult, and from age really like age 6, I was really expected to do things that maybe most parents that are, like they're kind of thinking in the standard way, they wouldn't expect their children to do until like maybe they were 13,
Yeah.
or older even, like get myself ready for school, get to the school bus, which it could be far, like, or, and then make myself breakfast, make myself dinner when I'm, and be alone a lot. And since I was an only child. And then, we moved around. I went to 12 different schools. Um, the only kind of family stability, I mean, I knew my mom had my back to a certain degree. Like, I knew, like, you know, monsters weren't going to come to the house, or
Yeah.
I don't know what, the things I wasn't a really fearful kid typically. I wasn't a, but it was a very anxious having to go to like 12 different schools and have to adapt each time. And my mother wasn't one of those helicopter parents was like, "Oh, I need to find the perfect school." I would just end up in whatever school there was, and
Oh,
it could be I was bullied, or I didn't have friends for like years at a time. So these these are like, you know over time, all of these stressors, it could even, um, almost like a stress disorder that
yeah. Yeah.
accumulated. And so by the age of 10, I was, definitely experiencing what I was like, why am I sitting in front of a TV in the summertime? All the kids are playing. I'm watching the Watergate trials. Like, I don't care about being a kid. I just want to be in my own home. Or when I was visiting my grandparents during the summer, I didn't want to go out and play with the children. I'd be like underneath the covers watching
Yeah.
TV with her. I literally was trying to self regulate at that time already, because I just felt like I just, I remember just I want a home. I want a home. It's almost like, I just wanted comfort. And I also was like, I wasn't a bad kid, like in the sense of like I was always like wanting to make sure that I was, a good kid. Um,
Yeah.
like maybe in my head I was like wanting to do all these things, and I definitely would like hide any kind of misbehavior. Um, because I didn't, I felt like my mom was very, very stressed out, just trying to, keep up with the bills, or the times that she was like really in debt, and we'd have debt collectors, call on the phone, and we wouldn't be answering the phone. That was before caller ID, so we didn't know who was calling us. It was almost like, the monsters on the other
Who
side of the
is
phone. I'm
that?
like,
Yeah.
yeah, so yeah, so just things accumulated, and yeah. I mean, I didn't know what was going on with me, but I just knew that I wasn't acting like the other kids, and I
Yeah.
often felt weird, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah.
And when you find out, let's say finally, like I I think that the biggest moment, that because I am a bipolar, will as you, the biggest moment is when we can finally place a name, not a label, but a name on the behavior or on the attitude or on the life that we were living until that moment. When it was for you, the moments where you were like, oh, okay, so I am a bipolar.
Well, I grew up again at a time which wasn't it it wasn't typical for kids to be, diagnosed with anything. Um, that didn't come until, I think, probably was out of high school, where kids were getting diagnosed with ADHD,
Yeah,
um, and they were going to therapists on the regular. Um, my family was really kind of like pull you up by your bootstraps kind of family. It's just like, you got a problem, you take care of it yourself, and like going to
I know, it
helping
was the same.
professionals and that
Yeah,
sort of thing. Which, it's a mixed blessing, because I'm still very much a very independent person, very
yeah,
self-reliant,
yeah,
but I needed to, what really, like, my growth edge now is really trusting people, that they have my back. So I didn't really trust people because I was like a little adult from age 6, and my dad was like another case altogether. When I would visit him, he was bipolar.
yeah.
Um, not diagnosed, but you could definitely you could tell. Everybody knew he was crazy. We were just like, oh, I'd be like, Grandma, he's not paying attention to me. Like, I go to his house, and like he doesn't, it's like his girlfriend's taking care of me, and like he doesn't have time for me. And she's like, oh, but your dad's crazy, you know. That's just your dad. He loves you. And he was like the life of the party, big personality. But then also, if things went wrong, he could go into these like crazy rages. And he never like physically hurt me, but he was like emotionally abusive, and
Yeah,
verbally abusive. Not all the time, but he lost it like that, and
yeah,
you'd be
yeah,
like,
yeah.
you'd be laughing and having a good time, and then maybe you say one thing, and he just like burst into flames, basically.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
then
yeah.
he would be, very morose too. You'd walk into a room, and you just feel like this heavy fog of like doom and gloom, and you're like, oh my goodness, I gotta get out of here. Doesn't feel safe. So, I'm not answering your question, getting around to it.
Well,
I promise you.
you are actually answering to the question, but I do know you. I do know how it works your mind. So we're gonna
I kind
arrive
of
to
go
the
around.
answer.
I'm like the dog or the cat that goes around and around in a circle, trying to like nestle
Yes,
into
you are.
their
Yes,
spot.
you are.
Um, so the I'm coming from this family, this very they don't look for helping professionals. So I was always just trying to figure out what was going on, but I didn't think that I knew there was something wrong, but I didn't know what exactly was wrong, and I wasn't going to go seek help. Although I probably, I did go to therapists a few times, and that was really, yeah. I mean, we can go on and on about therapy at another
Yeah,
time, but it didn't work for me at that time.
yeah,
Oops. So, um, but when I finally said, hey, I really like, again, I wasn't into putting a lot of, substances in my body. Just again, that self reliant kind of thing of like, I shouldn't need to depend on some sort of medication or whatever. Because, as you know, with bipolar,
Yeah.
we aren't always like destabilized. I
Yeah.
mean, so I'll go into my definition of
Yeah.
later, but
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
lot of times we're just, regular people. I mean, we're
Yeah.
not, we're, we have, problems and challenges just like anybody else, and we just deal with them like we deal with them. It's not like we're causing ourselves any trouble or anybody else any trouble.
Yeah.
In my mind, I was like, why do I have to take a medication for all the time if I'm only feeling bad some of the time?
Some of the time. Yeah.
So, when I finally, when I was age 35, and I was living in New York, and I had just lost a really good job, which was supposed to get me out of debt. I had left a divorce, or not left a divorce. I was divorced. It was about a year, into my
Mm-hmm.
divorce. Um, 30s, as you know, is a real delicate time. You have this idea that you should really have it together by then.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
If
But
you
it never
don't, you're like,
happens.
what is wrong with me? So there's already that societal pressure. And I actually had two rents, two very cheap rents, but they were still two rents that I was paying. I was sharing a place up in Woodstock, New York, and then I had a place, basically a couch, or in Manhattan, and September 11th happened, which is another, thing.
It's a big moment in
I
there.
was, single, and my whole 20s were consumed with like basically love addiction, always trying to find somebody to
Yeah.
save me from myself.
Yeah.
And so that was an ongoing thing going for me. And so yeah, and I was facing bankruptcy. So like all of these things, I mean, like any quote unquote normal person would be freaking out. And I'm like, well, I'm already, even when my life is perfect, I'm dealing with these periods of like deep depression, which is
Yeah.
like why. But now I actually have a reason. So it's almost like life had to become so terrible on top of what on top of what
Yeah.
I was experiencing. I'm like, I've got to pull out the big guns. So I was in this mindset, and then I was reading this book by Lynn Redfield Jameson called The Unquiet Mind. And she's a therapist, and she was talking about how, and she was living, a normal childhood, and somewhere around in her teens, she kind of, started really acting erratically and having just these kind of strange experiences where she's just like, I don't, she was basically out of control.
Yeah.
And so I and also speaking in retrospect as a therapist, she was explaining like what bipolar was, and it was very compassionate. It wasn't like, because she's talking about herself. Of course, she's, and she's a therapist. She painted the picture in a very compassionate way. So, I'm like, I want her, but of course,
It
at
was
that
kind of
point, I don't have
impossible.
any money at all. I'm like, how am I going to get a psychiatrist? So I had to like, um, I basically like recognize myself
Yeah.
in her, and also it's typically there. It runs in in a family.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, People, I guess, like the experts don't exactly know why it runs in the family. Is it like, is it nature or nurture? But It does,
It does, yeah.
so basically I found a psychiatrist who would take, cash that, but not a lot of it. And so I ended up, you know, going to this psychiatrist, and he helped me. He listened to me, um, and basically from our discussions, he agreed with me. Yes, that it sounds like you have bipolar 2, which actually I have bipolar 1, which
Yeah.
the difference between the two is that with bipolar 2 you're basically struggling with depression
Yeah.
and then hypomania, which is, lots of energy,
Yeah.
um, and but not to the degree that, you feel like you're out of control or other people feel you're out of
Yeah.
control.
Yeah. Yeah.
It basically is probably like a really nice high for most people, but it's like drinking coffee when you don't
Yeah.
drink coffee a lot, and
Yeah.
you're like, whoa, I feel like a superhero. So,
I was always
um,
saying I am naturally high. Every time
yeah,
that people were
yeah.
like,
Well,
why
that's the
you're
same.
so hyperactive? Well, I'm naturally high. So what can I say?
Yeah, I mean, I'd go out partying with my friends, and people were like, "Oh, why aren't you, drinking more or taking this or that substance?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't really need to. I'm naturally high. I mean, you will just be." And I was all about control too. So
Yeah.
like me, I don't understand the whole blackout drunk thing. Like that to me would be so
Yeah.
terrifying. I understand that people are do what they do,
Yeah.
and no judgment there, but it's just like I could not do that because I had to be like, since age 6 there was no option for me to just
Yeah.
be like, oh, just let myself go totally out of control. I'm like, no, there's nobody behind me, there's no support, there's
Yeah.
nobody has my back. So I can't do that. That just did not seem like an option,
Yeah.
no matter how bad I felt. I was always like, okay, so, you know, if I take this, whatever it is, sure, maybe it'll send me in a happy place,
Hmm.
but I know I'm coming back and it's
Yeah.
still going to be there and it's going to make me feel even worse because there was a logic. I have always had a pretty
Yeah, that's
logical
like
brain.
a huge awareness because like while you're talking, I'm thinking about my experience. I probably said many times that so I was studying psychology and while studying this, I probably had, I felt I had everything that was written in the book to the point that I was going to the doctor constantly saying, oh, I do have this, I do have that. And the doctor gently said to me, look, you are studying psychology, so it's normal that you feel that you have everything, but it doesn't mean anything. So, um, and I always had that kind of moments of huge depressions and then huge hyperactive moments as well. And it was just when I moved to London, because unfortunately here in Italy at that time there was not much mental health support. Like if you are bipolar here in Italy, you are crazy. So they just stopped to that. So I was really suffering the first 2 years in there, and a friend of mine said, just go to the doctor and he can help you. So I did everything, and the doctor was like, oh yes, you suffer from bipolar disorder. But I was not in control of that. Like when they gave me a name, I was like, oh wow, this is so basically all my life I thought that I was normal and now I do have a problem. Seriously, is happening this. Uh, but then I was using the medicines, I was using alcohol, I was using drugs all together, and that was not the best. Option that I could use on myself. So I was just getting completely crazy, like with huge moments, but literally huge moments of depression to think about suicide. Yeah, I literally thought I actually went in there, I touched that suicide moment. And thanks God I'm here. with all of you in here. But I had the moment of touching that point because I was just not just high mindedly, but I was constantly high. Everything was so um, there was like this huge fog in front of me where I was trying to, okay, where is the sun? Where is the sun? Where is the sun? And it was like boom, 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 and I couldn't understand until the point that I found there was this. He's a great person and a friend, and he said to me, you know, and here we're gonna connect with what happened with you as well because we do have a similar story. He said to me, you know, you don't need to take the medicine all the time. You know, if you understand when you need and if you understand the control of it, you can actually live also without it. So, and and here we're gonna connect really with your experience because what happened, it was, can you hear me? Yeah. What
Yes.
happened? Yeah. What happened with you? Like when you understood that, well, the medicine was not working and was not good for you. So where did you went? Where did you went to find your healing moment?
Well, yeah, so I did get on medication for about 6 months.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to name names because
Yeah.
everybody has different experiences. But I was only on one, which is very atypical. This is like
Yeah.
usually
Completely.
people are
Yeah.
taking a cocktail, right?
Yeah.
But we started it with one, because I wasn't acting. Yeah, I was a little like, I don't even know if I need this, but he explained that it was a mood stabilizer, and he, as I mentioned, had diagnosed me as bipolar 2 because, uh, yeah, it was the depression that was really bothering me, but I definitely had hypomania. But I didn't recognize that as a problem. And I
Mm-hmm.
actually did, in retrospect, I can see there were times that I was manic. But again, I didn't really recognize that as a problem because when I was depressed, I was like doing nothing. And
Yeah.
I figured out a lifestyle where I could take time off during the depression periods. Typically, I could.
Yeah.
The job that I was fired from, that wasn't the case. I didn't, it was like a full time job, so I wasn't, and it was, 9 to 5 or whatever. I was working as a cook for a wealthy family. I didn't have that flexibility, so
Yeah.
there would be times that I'd have this private apartment that I would cook in, and in between sort of like preparation of this or that, I would go into one of the bedrooms and just cry, and I'm like,
Yeah.
I actually have like a pretty good life, but
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
able to enjoy it. And So anyway, getting back to the medication, um, I so at that point I didn't. I was on unemployment and I was just sort of crafting my life post September 11th, working through the bankruptcy. Like all the problems are still there, and I wasn't really noticing any change really. I mean, I'm like, I guess maybe I'm a little less concerned. I mean, I didn't feel any kind of major thing. And then I think, and I was involved with some sort of creative product projects at that time. One of them was I was I've I've what is did I video? I went to this event, which was a anti-war kind of
Mm-hmm.
event because there was a lot of intellectuals and activists and so forth that were really concerned about the United States getting into war with Iraq. I mean, actually, there was quite a few people that were against the war that lived in New York, but there was a media blackout.
Yeah.
for,
Yeah.
that, because of course our country, as government had its mind, it didn't want to show that New York, of all places, there were like thousands of, or whatever, lots of people willing to go into the streets. And anyway, um, so I was working, I was helping video that event, and then I, met people and started, editing, and I was like doing a lot of things. Actually, I was, doing some side jobs, under the table, always like a little bit more money. So I was kind of like ramping up, ramping up, ramping up. And at one point, my friend, she's really like my sister, soul sister. She wanted, was wondering if we could get together for, dinner or whatever. And I'm like, no, I don't think the way I responded to her is kind of aggressive. And she's like,
Oh.
what is going on with you, Leela? Or at that point, Lisa. Um, like, what's going on with you? You just seem very, like, you're all over the place, and you're coming across as like kind of aggressive, and like, what's the deal? You seem to be a little different. And I'm like, oh, everything's fine. Everything's fine. Like, I just have a lot of things to do, and blah blah blah. Um, so basically, my energy was going higher and higher and higher, like it was a long sort of
Yeah.
increase. And I wasn't noticing it really. I was just doing my life, and it was exciting and so forth. Very creative, and meeting new people and doing new things. And until, excuse me, one night I was, in my resting on my Manhattan couch, sharing the living room, and I was, writing in my journal, because I that's been part of my thing. I've been journaling since I was 12. So we're and I was writing, I feel like I'm going crazy. And I just kept started writing it, just one, and looking at the script. And as I was writing it, it got crazier and crazier. It was almost like one of those movie moments
Wow.
where you could
Yeah.
just see it, you know, the camera is above, and you see this person writing normally, and then it gets more and more erratic,
Yeah.
and the person's like, ah.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
literally was what happened to me. I was like, what is going
Wow.
on? And so I called my mom, and I'm looking at my handwriting, like, what's going on? And I'm telling her, something's wrong, something's off. I don't know what is going on. And believe me, like, I've already gone through so many years of emotional volatility. So I know what that feels like. But this felt totally different. It almost felt like something was invading my body, almost like
Yeah.
somebody
Yeah.
else was taking the steering wheel. And I'm talking to my mom, and of course she's always thought of me as the little adult, like capable of anything, and she's like, "Oh, you're fine. You're doing a lot of things. Don't worry." And I'm like, "No, mom, something weird is going on." And I explained to her, and she's like, "Well, that sounds strange." And it wasn't like I was hysterical. I was very serious, and she just understood, like a mother
Yeah.
does,
Yeah.
um, that something was off, and that she's like, "Well, do you want me to come?" And she had like a high pressure job in California as an engineer, and here I am in New York, and I'm just calling her out of the blue, which
Yeah.
I never did. I mean, yeah, sometimes you're like, "Mom, I need some money," kind of thing, but that's not something that I did all the time. But this was something different. I wasn't asking for, financial help, or just, a shoulder to cry on type of thing. I was like, there's something going on. And I'm like, well, I kind of think you should. because I don't know where this is going.
Yeah.
So, so that, so she just like figured it out, like how she could just leave her job. And she didn't even know like how long it was going to,
Yeah.
be like how I was. Um, and the last kind of competent thing I remember doing before she arrived, and really I was out of it for 10 days, 6 weeks, I don't know. I need to look at my journals to really find that out of like what was that mystery period of time. Um, and I, living in New York, they have this alternate street parking where
Yeah.
if you don't move your car, it'll be towed away and you'll have to pay like hundreds of dollars, or they'll give you like a really horrible fine. Um, I had already had my car towed once, which I didn't want to have a repeat performance of that. So or maybe a few times actually. um, so in that state, I'm like, oh my God, though, I was doubting whether I could even drive my car, because who knows what was going
Yeah.
on inside me. But I went outside and I got into my car, and it was the strangest experience where I felt like my eyes were divided like into like 100 different parts. Like I was looking through a prism, like you
Yeah.
look at a fly's eye and it's got a bazillion little eyes.
Yeah.
Where
Yeah.
that was that's what I was looking at the world. It was just like the whole world was broken up into pieces. And I'm behind the steering wheel and I'm like, and of course, there's no like openings.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Well, actually, I think I lucked out. I think, initially when I got into the car, I didn't see any place for me to go to the other side because everybody just like bam, 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 they take all
Yeah.
those
Yeah. Yeah.
spots. Um, and then, by the grace of God, somebody pulled out. And I'm like, okay, here I go. It was just like literally across so I didn't have to drive far. But I was terrified. I was like literally terrified. And then when my mom came, she was like a caretaker for me. And that actually was a healing period of my timing of between her. Like that was a time where I realized how much she loved me.
Yeah.
And, she's past 2016 and
Yeah.
still, but yeah, she really, really loved me and
Yeah.
she rescued me. She saved my life, where I was like, oh yeah, my mother really does love me. When you're a little
Yeah.
kid, you're like, why does my mom have time for me? And,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
why I want to play, but she's always working, or, I want her to come home and she's out late with boyfriends. I mean,
Yeah.
I was like always feeling like I was not second place, but somewhere down, way down on the list of priorities. And so I'm like, oh yeah, I have a kid. I need to take care of their needs. Right. Thanks for reminding me. Um, it's just like, but just knowing, and then in retrospect, even like when she passed, or looking at kind of papers that she actually got in terrible trouble with her work because like she
Wow.
decided that she was going to use her company credit card to pay for
Oh.
because she was making good money but she wasn't really good at managing it, so I don't
Yeah.
think she just had the money to take this like last minute trip across the country. It's like expensive,
Yeah.
and
It's
then she didn't,
expensive. Yeah. Yeah.
so she just thought that maybe she could use it and then pay it back, which she did pay it back, but then she got in real trouble and she actually had to retire early. So then
Wow.
so I found all of this out after she had
After.
passed away, and it just like it caught my heart even more. I'm
Yeah.
like, my
Yeah.
mom really loved me. you
Yeah. Yeah.
know but it was a huge healing moment because at that time I whatever had happened, and I really like, you know it to me when I spoke to a cousin of mine who had actually had a stroke. He's like, wow, it sounds like you had a stroke. and I'm like,
Yeah.
well, why would I have a stroke? I mean, it was super healthy. It was a dancer, like a flamenco dancer. I was eating well. Yeah, I was living a stressful life, but who is not eating?
Yeah.
I was like
Yeah.
young, I wasn't like ancient or whatever. I always had like strong, sort of, robust health. Besides, what's going on in the noggin or the heart or whatever. Um, so I, for however long a period of time, my mother was literally almost like a caretaker, you
Yeah.
know, where I remember at one point where we decided that the best option for me to kind of get back on my feet was to go up to my Woodstock um, home, which was, beautiful house, handmade house where there were, it was along a creek and in the forest. I mean, it was like true sanctuary. And so my mom stayed with me there. We had there was other roommates, but a lot of times, we we had the whole house to ourselves. But I do remember, yeah, I remember one of my roommates like seeing that I was in crisis. Basically, she's like, Your mom can have my room, like
Yeah.
I'll sleep on the
Yeah.
couch. So I did have people that cared for me.
Yeah.
They
Yeah. Yeah.
were
Yeah.
that, but she knew there was something going on. It was, but I wasn't like, broadcasting it to everybody. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and thankfully at that point I was on unemployment, so I didn't have to worry about like calling into work or anything like that. And But I remember one time there were two moments that I remember um, that I didn't. For one thing, I didn't know how to get dressed, which is the
Yeah.
weirdest thing. It was like, what order do
Yeah.
I put my socks on first, or my underwear, or my shoes? And like I'm like, Mom, I just don't know what to do, and I've been
Yeah.
doing this since I was little, I didn't have my clothes set out for me and stuff like that when I was a little kid. So that was just like really frightening. And then I remember at one point when we were down in New York walking along the Hudson River, and I just remember all this light. And this was actually a more of like a kind of like a healing type, like where I felt like maybe there was some hope or whatever, but I also felt like it was just very strange because it just felt like my head was being filled with light, and and the whole world was light, and I was just like, what is going on? Again, it didn't have that euphoric
Yeah.
type
Yeah.
of feeling
Yeah.
that like mania does. I was very feeling like this, like a little old lady almost, walking with my mom, um, and, doing our little daily constitutional or whatever, as people do. Um, and I was really worried that I would be able to ever dance again because it was like, and that was my whole life. I wasn't like a professional dancer, but it was just, that was part of my like intuitively therapeutic journey
Yeah.
to just like totally devote myself to like flamenco dance, which is a great art form for expressing, deep anger and joy and like
Yeah.
tragedy, and in a very intense and repetitive way. So this was like the perfect kind of like creative therapy for myself, or for anybody that has, bipolar, check out flamenco.
Flamenco. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So, but from all of that, from the moment of the erratic writing to whenever I um was starting to feel, more stabilized, I definitely, I was like, this is just so weird. This is not something that ever happened to me. The only thing that makes sense is that the drug that I was
Yeah.
taking
Yeah.
had pushed me into like a pharmaceutical mania,
Yeah.
not an emotion, like not the typical kind of mania, but that it just pushed me over the edge,
Yeah.
and that was due to like a misdiagnosis basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
um because I was, on a mood stabilizer that was supposed to, basically if you're depression, then it bumps you up, but it kept
Yup.
on
Yeah.
bumping me up until like I went off the cliff.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I was like, Mom, I need to, like, basically, I stopped like cold turkey. And I would not at all recommend that to people, um, because the way they create these drugs, they have some serious
Yeah.
withdrawal like effects. They
Yeah.
potentially do. Not everybody has it, but they
Yeah.
can be very dangerous if you just stop cold turkey. But that is the choice that I made, and I'm glad I made that choice. But also, I'm glad because I didn't suffer any kind of like serious repercussions,
Yeah.
from it. Um, and I'm like, Mom, we need to go to the psychiatrists, make and tell him that, like, you need to get, I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah.
And she's like, okay, well, are you sure about that? And I'm like, well, I am. I'm pretty darn sure. So we
Yeah.
did
Yeah. Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
And of course, he handed me a bag of other, because like I didn't have any money. So he was giving me samples, right?
Yeah.
So he had these extra samples and he's like, well, kind of like, so what do we do here? A little bit of this, a little bit of that. It's like, I
It
don't
was
know how
like
these
a
these
safe
psychiatrists
place.
operate. It's kind of like
Dun,
they're
dun, dun,
like
dun. Yeah.
improv kind of
Yeah.
like, you're like,
Like cool.
this is my brain, this is my body, and they're like, oh,
Yeah.
maybe a little bit of this, a little dash of that. Let's see how this works. And you're like, okay, let's see. So so he handed me like a bag of stuff, and then he's like, take this, whatever it was. And so I took this one, suggested drug that was supposed to calm me down. But what ended up happening, it was just the weirdest thing. We're in the car, we're just like getting, I think we just had lunch, and maybe trying to figure out what the next thing we're going to do. And it felt like, it almost felt like I was like this emotional marionette,
Yeah.
because if you think of like, the emotional spectrum there, from like, tragedy crying to, to rage to, hilarity, or I felt like somebody was just like moving
Yeah.
that
Yeah. Yeah.
dial,
Yeah.
because every 2 seconds I was expressing another like dramatic
Romantic
emotion,
emotion. Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was it, like one moment I'd be like, and I knew that it was weird. I mean, it was like, I don't know what's going on here, but it was like, my mom would say something and like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, I don't know why I said that. Like, and they're like, oh, I don't know what's going on. And like, and then I'd be like, ah, and then, and I'm like, I am not this person. I'm like,
Yeah.
and I'm
Yeah.
telling my mom, I'm like, I don't know what's going on, because I am like, I'm so, and at some point I was just so upset with myself that I like opened up the car door. I had bare feet and I was running down the road crying
Yeah.
and just like, acting like that, kind of cinematographic crazy person. And I'm like, I am not this person, like I had, at that point I had graduated from college, and I had friends, and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I was able to do like flamenco, which is like a very intense art form. And I was able to like keep it together living into New York, pay bills for 2 apartments. It's just like I was not this person, and it felt like my life, my my being was being hijacked by
Yeah.
this medication. And I was just like, and another medication. And I'm like, no, I don't think so. Like this is not me. And I remember also in the period of time when I was taking the medication, I thought, well, yeah, group therapy might be a good idea. Um,
Yeah.
and I remember the one time I went to this hospital or whatever. They have their weekly group therapy sort of
Yeah.
drop in session, and I was just listening to everybody like talk about their cocktails, and I'm like, I'm on one. Like, and
Yeah.
they're like, oh, I took this, and then that made me too hypomanic, so I need to take this to calm down, and or I couldn't sleep, so I need to take this, and like it's
Yeah.
this constant kind of back and forth, and I'm like, I'm taking one, you know and then there was this one guy I remember, and I just felt for him, but the way he was like, you guys, I'm feeling so much better than I've ever felt, and I just want to thank you for all the support, because I don't think I would have been able to survive without you guys, and I really think my medication is working so much better. And I'm like, what?
I had the same situation basically. And I had the same situation, and we were having a lunch. I don't know where, me, my boyfriend, and a group of people, and I was literally moving in this way, like swinging. And are you okay? Never been so good in my life. I was everything was so calm, like the flowers, like, oh, look to the flowers blooming, until the point that my doctor said, if you have that kind of reaction, that means that the medicine is not good for you. And I was like, oh, you take me out this now? Seriously? Leela, when did you start? Because every time that we talk, I always have a laugh of how many things you did in your life, how many things you studied in your life. And but I am super curious to know if the astrology part started from that moment or before.
Well, my mom is like a bookaholic. She was, and I had mentioned the Asperger's. She was just like all into like geeking out in all these different things. And her whole family was like that. They were like
Yeah,
these little, um, kind of amazingly smart people that you didn't even want to even attempt having an uninformed opinion about
yeah,
their particular expertise. And and I remember, I guess I was around 11, 10 or 11, where we had moved to California from Virginia. This was like a tough time, really tough
mhm,
time for me, tough transition. Let me I'm like, feel like not bright enough here. Um, so um, I my mom had like a designated like meditation room, and
yeah,
and I remember it just being white, um, but having shelves. I think it didn't have built-in shelves, but and she had like things like crystals and um, candles and whatever, like all it, and you come into this room, and it's just like, angels singing, whatever.
yeah, yeah,
Just like she did the right thing. It was like this magical kind of room. Um, and that's where, and of course the walls were filled with all sorts of, um, like like Wiccan and just, I mean,
Yeah.
just every kind of like book from all these different sources of like alternate occult knowledge, and but also um, like kind of like the early self-help books.
Yeah.
So I found Linda Goodman's astrology, like the sun signs astrology, and that's a very fun book to read. It's very pop kind of, and it was just, I felt like, oh wow, this is like a doorway into understanding myself,
Mm-hmm.
by understanding these signs. And I'm an Aquarius, which is super quirky, so I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, that's it.
Such
And I
a
don't,
weird
yeah.
sign.
As an astrologer, I know, we're so much more complex than our,
Yeah.
like our sun
Yeah.
signs, so much more complex. um it's a very, yeah, like all signs are not the same as far as like people, so anyway, that was the start, and that just like, I I was all about finding out what was going on with me,
Yeah. Yeah.
um and that was just like the beginning of a love story,
Yeah.
and then, as I think like my first possibly, I would pick up books and do self study. And of course, this was before the internet, Um, and I was just, for me, libraries are kind of, I enter a library, and again, I feel like angels singing. And I, walk down a an aisle, and I have an idea of what I want, but like books are like saying, "Hey, me, look at
Take
me,"
me.
and
Yeah.
I just always, I don't look at the book catalog was never really that helpful. It was
Yeah.
always more helpful to just go down the aisles and just pick whatever book seemed to be taking my attention, and that was, always how I would learn about new things and so forth. So, but my first astrology reading, like I can't even say the word, um, it it was so healing. And this happened, I think, what, probably in my 20s, where I was just like, wow, this feels great, like this person like knows me already. They know my life already. Like, how is that possible? This is
Yeah.
magical. I mean, of
Yeah.
course I had been studying, but it's a totally different thing from like looking at the books and kind of understanding from the outside in. But then to be the subject of, quote, like a reading is really a gift. It's really, exciting. And so I loved astrology readings, but of course, most of my, early adult life, I didn't really have a lot of money, so that was like a huge luxury. I
Yeah.
mean, I wish we had, health insurance that covered astrology
The
readings,
strategy
honestly.
reading as well.
Because
That would be
honestly, they were
great.
so much more productive and healing,
Yeah.
and than any of my therapy sessions. Because at least at that time,
Yeah.
the person just sat there and listened to me, like asked us a couple of questions. I'm like, damn, I have better luck with my friends. In fact,
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's not that I don't believe in therapy, but I don't believe in that just kind of sit there, get,
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
your
Each
hundred
one we have a
or
different
more dollars,
experience. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and
I
not do a
agree.
damn thing,
Yeah.
like I'm like, give me something here. I'm giving you a lot. Give me something, and that's why I like the coaching paradigm, because it's
Yeah.
like, nobody's going to be paying you to just sit there and and not like provide wisdom, or give you exercises, and to like kind of hold your feet to the fire. Because I knew a lot of people that would be doing therapy for years, and
Yeah.
I'm like, I hate to say it, I mean, I never would say it, but in my mind I'd be like, you haven't changed. So like all that money, all that money you've been spending. I'm hearing the
Oh,
same things. I'm like, are you telling your therapist about this? Or are they just like cashing in like your regular,
yeah.
like cha-ching?
Unfortunately, it happens a lot. Unfortunately, it
And
happens a lot. And do you think that like since you were a kid, you've been really curious and you've been really creative and you're writing stories and all of that. Do you think that is because of that that you learned so much? Because like every time that I talk with you, you're like, oh, I'm doing these classes, I'm doing that a class. I'm like, oh my God, how someone can, you know, be so curious. It like it happened. I am curious as well, but you're just in another level. Like,
well, I think again, looking back to my childhood, well, both of my parents very curious people as well. Like
yeah,
they're always like reaching into different directions and exploring things kind of intellectually or creatively. Like my dad was more of the creative. Um, he carved and he made sculpture and stuff. And when I was very little, soon after the divorce, he just like really focused on creating me like this little
yeah,
puppet theater and um, doing really kind of magical things, that just came out of his brain. Like how was he inspired to do these things? Who knows? And then my mom was just super intellectually curious. So I came from a background of that. And
yeah, yeah,
and also because I saw my mother using books to, using knowledge, and
yeah,
then so, so I really understood, I didn't need to be told that education was really important.
yeah.
What I just, so yeah, it was just a matter of really like knowing that knowledge is a tool,
Yeah,
and also looking at creative, like, I guess it was around 8 or so that I started writing these stories about this little band of happy animals that were like solving mysteries and going on adventures and so forth.
wow.
And I don't know how my teacher found out about that,
Yeah,
whether I just handed it in or whatever, because it was just kind of like my own thing.
yeah.
Um, but at some point she was like, she wanted me to like tell like share these stories with my class. And I became this little star, which was another
It's
kind
so
of
cute.
un- and I'm like realizing maybe I don't like to be a star so much,
Oh,
because there was like little jealousies. And
yeah, a lot of jealousy. Yeah, I can
people were
imagine that.
treating me like I was some strange, you know like,
The weirdo of the class.
yeah, I'm like,
How
I'm
is
already
possible she's
weird. I don't.
writing all that?
So, but I did it as a kind of, it was a coping mechanism because I
Yeah,
didn't have any friends. Um and I wanted to have fun. And
yeah,
a lot of times I was like alone in my apartment, and I just was like, okay, well, this is a way I created my own world.
yeah.
um and that's, and I was, it's like gives you agency. Writing gives you agency, with
Oh,
journaling.
yeah, 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 yeah.
It so and then I would just, when I was by myself, I'd like put on um you know just records and be dancing around and singing around. And that was like my own personal bliss. So it kind of, I think, even though struggled with depression for decades, really, I would say that the most potent kind of, you know, the most potent or powerful activities I did were really my creative passions.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, I mean, those carried me through some really tough times.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And let me tell you this. Uh, I had for almost 1 year a block on writing,
Mm.
a block on writing. And then we started our coaching sessions and talking with you. And this is like a huge advertise for Leela.
Ha ha.
um, Suddenly, you did like you do many things on your coaching practice, and one of them is the dance movement. So you create all these moments for how many we were? 6 people, 7 people, 10 people? Well, many people. And you created this playlist. There was all this movement coming from the chakra, the body, connection to the earth, connection with the universe. It was really calm. And, I always say to you, you do have a voice that it really calms me down because I have problems with accents and all of that. So if I don't like the accent, I'm not listening at all. But it's not your case. And after that session, that was so powerful, there was something that clicked in me. And I was like, I have to write. I have to come back to doing back because for 3 months, I just stopped myself from doing lives on Inside Timer and doing many other things. I was just concentrating on the jewelry side and the podcast and all of that. But I have to say that thanks to you, because you said, dancing, there was always that creative side that really helped you to go through. You really told me, like, probably in a conscious way, hey, Jude, you are a creative soul. It's your moment, and it was so, so powerful because from the day after, I was like, okay, I need to start everything back. So I took the book that I'm writing, I started to dance back again. There was like a sort of the heaviness leaving my body, and it was so, so powerful. It was like a real connection with self-love.
Yeah.
What is self-love, Leela, for you?
Well, self-love for me is this combination of awareness and of self, like sort of
Yeah,
your um tied with compassion, you know.
yeah,
So so many years experiencing these deep depressions where I was just not really understanding the meaning of my life or why even live, thank goodness there were people in my life that I knew, like my mom, that I knew would be heartbroken if I did something,
yeah,
terrible, that kept me from going, like seriously going down that, but contemplating like why am I suffering like this?
yeah,
um but it was my love of the people in my life, and also love of, like, I knew with creativity that was a deep love of those activities. And
yeah,
with bipolar, we do go up and down. So
yeah,
I knew at some point I'd be coming out of it, and thank
yeah,
goodness, like you understood the waves, right? So I knew that at some point, of course, but in depression, when you're really depressed, you just feel like it's like the end of the road. Like you're going to be this way forever because it
yeah,
just feels terminal.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and So I think, me kind of holding on to that love became self love ultimately. It was a self loving act, but I didn't feel like I loved myself because obviously, like feeling so tortured, you identify with your moods, and
yeah,
we are separate from that, So
yeah,
I
yeah,
think my real turning point was when I did discover meditation really early on, around age 19, um, but I don't think I was entirely ready for it. I used it meditation that was a mindfulness meditation, and I used that for I knew, like, when I was kind of bad, I would go to that. And
Yeah.
I was like, okay, that exists. Like I recognized it as a tool, but it was like one of those love hate tools because I didn't
Yeah.
really want to be quiet with my mind. I was like, I
Yeah.
don't want to
Yeah.
be in this space with myself. Like I don't want to face that, you know. And with mindfulness meditation, it's all
Yeah.
about facing yourself,
Yeah.
um, but it's also about depersonalizing and like taking away the labels and
Yeah.
taking away the judgments, you know, and just really connecting with that observer.
Yeah.
So think it wasn't until I was 40 that I started with yoga, you know, at a gym.
Yeah.
And that, you know, just going to a, you know, your regular yoga class, although the instructor, she obviously had like this spiritual side, but she
Yeah.
was very grounded. And I just like really, I'm like, I want to be like her, like, and you know, and she would share, you know, every once in a while how she was going through different challenges or whatever, but she just seemed so kind of like chill, and like she was an
Yeah.
inspiration. And I remember us going, you know, to the park outside to do, you know, yoga. And I was just like, oh my God, this is so amazing. And I was like starting to come into my body and just feeling how like my body and my being could be a safe place, you
Yeah.
know? So, and that was kind of like my start on really putting more kind of, well, you know, the tools that,
Yeah.
and really understanding more and more. So my awareness started expanding, and because of course being as curious I am, I'm like pulling
Everything.
from everywhere.
Yeah. From everywhere. From everywhere. And well, you do have a nickname that is Leela
Mm-hmm.
and has a beautiful meaning. Can
Mm-hmm.
you share that?
Well, so my official name is Elizabeth, and then, you know, junior high kids didn't want it. It was too long of a name. They're like, oh, you know,
Elizabeth.
so they became, you know, Liz is what I
Yes,
became.
yeah.
And that wasn't like, you know, it was kind of like on the spot. They're like, oh, Elizabeth's too long, what do we call you other than that? And I'm like, oh, okay, well,
Okay.
okay, how about Liz? And they're like, okay, fine. So I had that up until college, and then I'm like, I want to choose my own name. And so I picked Lisa, which is fine, except it was always like people are like, um, you know, they'd call me Liza or Lisa. And
Yeah,
of course,
yeah,
and I'd always, and they would, like, I tell them the right way the first time, and then they would be like, they mispronounce or misspell it. And I would just like, after maybe a few months, I'm like, you know, it's actually whatever. And then there would be this very awkward moment. They're like, oh my God. So anyway, I was, I went to, you know, at one point I went to India, um, to go on a motorcycle trip over the
wow,
Himalayas.
wow. Here we go. Another thing. And I'm always like, oh, seriously? You've done
Yeah,
so
that's
many
another story in and
things.
of itself. But
Yeah,
that's where I, you know, was meeting a lot of people that had, you know, they had received or given themselves Sanskrit names like Saraswati and,
yeah,
you know, these different. And I was like, well, I don't know if I want something that, you know, like that, like in your face. And
yeah,
people are kind of like what is your name? So I my kind of like my mentor, um guru, and yeah, his name's Anand Malhotra, although there, of course I have a million other teachers,
yeah,
like
yeah.
yourself. Uh, he he was giving a talk, on the long extended talk, on the Bhagavad Gita, and he would mention Leela
Hmm.
many times, and the way he would say it was like Leela, you know, it's just like he, and I'm like, huh, that kind of sounds like Lisa.
kind,
Yeah.
kind. But
And
yes,
I'm like,
Lisa, Leela, yeah,
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 yeah. And I'm like, that could work with Elizabeth. And Leela basically is, it's the idea of cosmic play. So that we're living this life, but essentially we're these, in these bodies,
yeah,
these meat suits or whatever. And but we really are is this eternal, energetic being,
yeah,
that has no beginning, no end. So that's what they, when we're talking about like you are perfect and, and you are safe, that's what is being referred to. Yeah, like
yeah,
obviously our body, all sorts of things can happen to our body, but our body is not us. So that's kind of the yogic sort of philosophy, and that the idea of Leela is this play between like being a material being but also a spiritual being, and that sort of that, and that we're in a way we're actors on this stage, and
yeah,
that we don't need to get lost in the drama. So to
yeah,
me, like having so many lives and personalities with the bipolar and whatever, it just like was like, oh, that's kind of sounds like me. Like that
yeah,
kind of sounds like I'm in this cosmic play of, you know,
yeah,
choosing these identities and then like, oh, that's not working anymore. Let's try something new.
yeah.
So,
Because you sent me like a Shakespeare quote to really explain that,
mm-hmm.
that I found beautiful. Can I read it?
Yes, please do, because I can't remember it. I mean, I
Yeah.
remember it, but I'll misquote it. So, yeah.
So, all the words a stage, the whole world is a stage, and although men and women merely actors, they have their exits and their entrances. And in his lifetime, a man will play many parts. His lives separated into 7 acts. That
Mm-hmm.
is so beautiful.
Yeah.
I'm not a really
Yeah.
friend of Shakespeare, but I found that really beautiful.
Right. Who knew that he was like a yoga guy?
Can you imagine that? Yeah. Well, it
Where did
could
he
be
pick that
because,
up?
yeah, completely. Well, some of his plays, they are so strange. And yeah, maybe, yeah, there in
That could
where
be
was
some
Stratford upon Heaven and doing
right.
some
Somebody
meditation and yoga in that.
right, exactly. Somebody could do a PhD thesis on you
Yeah,
know, the yoga influences in Shakespeare.
yeah.
Who knows?
So, Lila, well, you do have a podcast as well.
Mhm.
Can you talk about? I
Well,
love the name of it.
yeah.
At the
Yeah.
beginning I didn't understood. You sent me a message. I was like, what who she's talking about? And I was like, oh,
Well,
that's the name.
the name of the podcast is called What I Didn't Tell My Therapist. Um and it's been on hiatus because initially when I started with a dear friend of mine, Haley Novander, and she's a wonderful comedic like actress that's trying to make her way into fame, which I believe she'll do at some point.
Yeah,
You know, it's a process. Um, and so basically, we started it with this idea of kind of DIY, do it or DIY, do it yourself healing, and
yeah,
or just like trying to like make, we see our lives and we want to improve them, improve our experience, whatever, but from a very compassionate and playful sort of way. So that, it's like the first 7 shows are just like kind of basically our exploration and, using creativity and kind of, self help stuff and having conversations, just on that mindset and that process. And so we've, we completed 7 shows, but then COVID happened.
mm.
And you
No,
would think
no,
that that would be the
no.
ideal to kind of continue, but well, actually, we took a bit of a hiatus, even previous to that, because we started getting into things. Like it actually, like the podcast sort of opened us up to our own directions. Like at that point, I was starting my health coaching program, and she was starting another, um, project, the intensive, like long term project. Um, so we kind of, it kind of like got things going, just like that dance got things going for you. But
Yeah.
then when we were about to return to it, COVID was there, and it was just very strange, and I'm like, this is a perfect time because like everybody's wanting to listen to podcasts, but we just didn't kind of reconnect again. I'm hoping, she'll return, but to at least be a guest. So it just like it's been on hiatus, but I want basically what I didn't tell my therapist, 2.0. And I know I'm talking a lot, and there's we're running out of time. You're like, this is going to be 2 episodes.
I knew it.
It's
It's
like
like
I
we are
nonstop
supposed to
talking.
do 1 hour, and I'm like, well, with Leela, it's kind of impossible. So I just need to be okay with that. And the listeners, you're going to be okay with that as well. So you're going to stay here until she will finish. And you're
You're
going to
like,
watch
shut the hell
us
up.
until she will finish. So we are
We're
staying here.
almost done. We're almost done. No, I hope I'm entertaining enough to listen to me
Oh,
blab on
definitely.
and on.
Definitely. I'm not sleeping.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Like, if this is your sleepy podcast, yeah, well, good for you. Um, so yeah, the reboot is basically, well, I wanted to work, you know, with another co-host. Hint, hint.
Oh, who is it? Who is it? Who is it?
If you should so be interested, I would love
Let me
you to be
see.
the.
How long will be the episodes?
They won't. They Yeah. Well, the thing is, it's this idea of like really looking at, the self transformation, mental health, emotional health, like all of these different topics, just the healing world, and
Yeah,
really being like really no holds barred, good times though, high vibes,
yeah,
dealing with the issues, like
yeah,
not sugarcoating it,
yeah.
and
Well, you probably found the best co-host ever. I am probably too honest in this holistic world.
Oh, the more
Too
honest and
honest.
rebellious the possible, because I just feel, yeah, like I feel like one of the main things that, um, when you asked about self love, is just this really understanding, what we need for our bodies,
Yeah,
and our
yeah,
beings and so forth.
yeah,
And I think we've been caught in the mental, emotional, health
yeah,
paradigm that it's been very disempowering, you know.
yeah. I
And there
agree.
were just like go in and all these experts are coming in to tell us what to do with our lives, and they, like, for the most part, we don't know who these people are. They're not sharing their truths. They're not sharing their
Yeah,
reality, and we don't know what agenda they have. Supposedly it's to make us be better, but the track record is pretty terrible. I don't really see
yeah,
that, oh, depression's been cured,
yeah,
anxiety's been
yeah,
cured.
yeah.
No,
I totally agree.
yeah. And so, like, and I really love the coaching paradigm because I think there's this general consensus that you need to walk your talk. You can't just be, you know, giving things that come out of a book. You have
Yeah,
to have lived it,
yeah,
and you have, it's like not everybody's experience is the same, and
yeah,
people need different things at different times. So I think, like, you know, the idea of the podcast is to kind of, look at creativity and how healing it is, bringing in people like, artists that have had, you know, mental health
yeah,
struggles or emotional health struggles, and talk about how their art is healing, and talk and bringing in other people that are willing to be a little, like maybe a little bit out of their comfort zone, or maybe and just like be really real about
Yeah.
things. Because I
Yeah.
think,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
you know, there's this mental health crisis around the world, and I don't think we can like fool around anymore. Like we
Yeah.
really need to face it and say
Yeah.
what's working, what's not working, and we're not taking anything off the table. If
Yeah. Yeah.
pharmaceuticals really work for you, God bless.
Yeah.
Do it. Do you
Yeah.
do you, boo?
Yeah.
But we already know we have a huge PR machine for that. So I don't
Yeah.
need to be like, oh, do this because you know
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
they're
Yeah. Yeah.
taking care of
Okay.
that. We need to really like show and like show tools and practices and so forth of like, you know, um, like things on the podcast,
Yeah.
doing guided meditations or whatever, it so that's what I'm excited about it. And hopefully by maybe March, we'll have like a few episodes
A few
in the
episodes.
can to
Yeah.
do a launch, but
Good. But and this we are coming by the end to the end by the end to the end. And
finally.
you launched your website,
Hmm.
and you also launched many many appointments
Hmm.
and many many things. Can you just go through all of them?
Okay. Yeah.
People take notes and go to check.
Well, I'm I have two major offerings, more things coming, because my brain just doesn't stop. But
We
like,
know
oh, we could
that.
do this and oh, we could do that, and so the main what two main offerings is an astrological reading. We call it like a heroine's journey through your chart,
Yeah.
where I really do a deep dive reading of looking at all of the houses around your chart, and each house defines an area of your life, and the planets and the energies and the interrelationships, all with the intention to help you create a blueprint for your life and to really deeply understand yourself, um, from an energetic point of being, but
Yeah.
also understanding like what your strengths and weaknesses are and how to like work with them. So it's really like it's a tool, like it's a map. And that's it. And I'm a pretty optimistic person, not unrealistic but optimistic. So
Yes, you are.
even you know I'm not going to pussyfoot around and try to hide things from you. I'm going to like be very like compassionate and straightforward, but I always have like kind of a positive spin on things. Like, oh, you may be having this, but this is what you could do. So it's like people that have had readings, they just feel like, oh wow, I feel so much hopeful. I feel like, I have more hope about this area in my life, and I feel empowered to take these things on. It doesn't seem to be such a mystery to me anymore. So I have that, and then the other one is um, meditative exploration, which would be a series of, you suggested at least,
Yes, I did.
like, what is
8
it,
weeks.
8 weeks? So this is, a lot of people say, oh, I don't know how to meditate, I don't get it, whatever. Well, there's so many different ways of meditating, and it could be walking meditation, it could be gardening meditation, it could be mindfulness, breathing practice, dance meditation, drawing. So basically, it would be me working with whoever's interested and going on this journey, just exploring what works for you, and just really us deep dive trying to create a practice that
Yeah.
will transform your life, and be familiarize yourself with the different kind of meditative practices so that you can really like shift, maybe create another practice on your own, because what it feels like, or the kind of results that happen when you implement it. So there's
Yeah.
that, and then the other one is just kind of a general coaching where you would, use one of these tools, and then we'd create your fine tune your practice to transform your life, and empower you to have your own personalized healing journey, or however you want to change and upgrade your life.
Yeah. Well, and people can find you on here. If I was saying my website, you were saying yours. leeladavis.com. So you
Yeah.
can find all the details on the podcast. So we just leave everything in there, how you can contact Leela as well.
Mm-hmm.
And Leela, like I am so happy because we push each other in this last period. Me pushing you to do websites and many things, you pushing me to learn more technical stuff that is actually pretty good, because this is, I think that between bipolars we need to push each other. We just
But
procrastinate
gently,
quite a lot.
gently,
Yeah,
without.
gently. Yeah, no judgment, just no pressure. You just have 4 days, no pressure about. Thank you
Exactly.
so much for being here, for
Mm-hmm.
being a huge inspiration, and yes, I can't wait to see your growth, you know, and all the many
Likewise.
things. Oh, thank you, and all the great things that you're gonna do.
Yeah, well, I'm so pleased to have had your support during this time. I just, yeah, like I just feel like your being on this planet is such a treat. I'm like, yay, Jude.
It
You,
is.
you like working with him is not. Oh, it's like a joy. You're like, yay, I get to
Oh.
meet with Jude. So thank you for that. And thank you for this opportunity to talk about my work and to share my quirky healing with everybody. So, yeah.
And yeah, so to all the listeners in here, make sure to check also my website, that is healingwithjude.com, for all the updates, events, and visit also the shop to see my beautiful Healing with Jewels bracelets. And if you are listening, you can also watch our beautiful faces on YouTube on my new channel, that is Healing with Jude. And if you like what you listen today, please follow the podcast on Spotify, review it on Apple Podcasts, and share with anyone you know, because more we share this episode, and more this episode can arrive all over the world.